are listening to an episode of the Casting Shadows podcast. This podcast, and the other media through which I share thoughts on role-playing games and the effects of how we play them and who we play them with, is rooted in the ideas that the medium of RPGs is conversation. The games themselves are enjoyable filters, context, and boundaries for those conversations. And the people that we play them with have a position of shared trust and responsibility in the groups we form together. Our shared goal is one of satisfaction from play, in whatever form that satisfaction should take, given the people we are playing with, the games we are playing, the way we are playing them, and the intention we direct toward all of that. We could game with strangers. The games, however, are a route to transforming strangers into friends. This episode is an example of that transformation from stranger to friendship. Joining me as guests are two Brians and an Ivan. If you visited the RuneSlinger YouTube channel, the odds are good that you have seen videos of one or more of us playing separately and together in a variety of games. Lately, Call of Cthulhu. One day recently, we did not have the right mix of players available to continue to play where we had left off in the previous session, so we, as we sometimes do, gave ourselves the time to sit back, chat, and enjoy each other's company. What arose from that conversation was this episode, which I'm pleased the gents are willing to share with all of you. It is a long conversation, and initially ran more than 2 hours. I've trimmed off the first part of our conversation to use in a different episode. And in that cut section, my guests revealed their gamer origin stories, and their light-hearted remembrances are a lot of fun to listen to. So I've decided to have a chat with the other players and get their stories. When I get them all gathered together, I'll share them. For this episode, however, all that's relevant to note is that all four of us started RPGs in the 80s. Two of us stopped playing in the middle, and two of us did not. Three of us were introduced to the hobby through our friends and our own interests and investigations, not to mention comic book ads in the Sears catalog, while one of us encountered it by sheer luck. The four of us have different approaches to many things and different experiences along the way to meeting and starting to play together. And that is where the magic springs from. In this recording, the first person to respond to me, the first voice that you're going to hear that isn't mine, belongs to Brian Courtemanche, a librarian, a scenario writer, an all-around good soul. The next to respond is our second Brian Gregory. He's a semi-retired chef, artist, YouTuber, whose videos I've recommended to you in the past, and at present is taking time to write his own game, Quantum. The final guest to respond is Ivan Podgwaite, a longtime friend of the channel, and me. Ivan, unlike me, is good friends with math, and the two of them still talk. I don't hold that against him. Like me, however, when Ivan plays and runs games, there is a drive to focus on the experience of being the character and to facilitate that opportunity in the other players. This conversation, as presented here, begins with our thoughts on scenario design and assessment. It moves into a discussion of a motivation to write a game and do so in a way that can show a different paradigm of how a rulebook could be presented and what that might include. That section is mostly a single voice, and I hope that you give the speaker your attention, because at the conclusion of that response, I think a lot of important ideas about games, game books, and the typical approach to learning games has been expressed and formed into a loving question that I know I share about how well all of that works for us now, 50 years into the hobby. Finally, we end off on a light note with some improvisational fun by taking a look at a few of the prompts for RPG A Day 2025. That starts off at around the 1 hour and 20-minute mark, so if the other stuff doesn't grab you, please try leaping there before ejecting from the episode. Anyway, let's stop faffing about and get into my friendly conversation with Brian Courtemanche, Brian Gregory, and Ivan Podgwaite. And I guess where I'd like to start is with your thoughts on, in terms of the printed stuff that you hold, right? What makes for you, what makes a useful, I hesitate to use the word good, that's why I'm kind of prevaricating here, but what makes a useful scenario that you would read, and how does it inform your creative process as you are, getting ready to run a game? Who wants to go first? Or should I choose randomly?
Well, I can be foolish and or brave and jump into the breach. Fools rush
Jump
in,
in.
right? So yeah. So what makes for a useful thing? Um, I I would preface my response with sometimes the way something reads and the way something actually plays at the table can be two very different things. So I always take a bit of just this is just a personal thing. I always take issue with people who say they've done a review of an RPG adventure or game,
But
but
didn't
it's an
play
arm
it.
it's they haven't played it. No, or it's to my I'm guessing that I don't want to defame anyone, but I get a sense that they haven't played the major with the majority of the stuff that they're talking about. They haven't played it. They've done a read through, and that can be helpful. But it's almost like I almost think of like a food critic that looks at the menu and then critiques the food, but hasn't eaten it. So it's like
Yeah.
to my mind, you gotta put the time in and you've gotta like sit down and do it. And then you can give a more nuanced and to my mind, just more honest. I mean, it can still be very subjective, but it's just, I feel like you can relate the full experience. So I guess I would preface what I'm about to blather on about with that. Um, Now that said, um, I find scenarios or items useful when it's something that Ivan just said a moment ago. He said that to the early books, he said I could read it in a day and I could just run it. And that is subjectively, that's something I look for. I look for something that I can open it up, whether it's a 64-page booklet or it's a multi-volume mega campaign, but it's got to be something that I can open it up and it's got to grab me and I get it. I understand it. I'm not struggling I can kind of flip through it, kind of give it a scan and say, okay, I see how this is supposed to go. It sort of speaks to me. And then I feel comfortable. There's a sort of a comfort level that kind of rings my inner bell. And it's kind of like you know it when you see it. And maybe it's different for different people, but what I don't like, and I want to keep everything positive. I'm not trying to go like, negative or whatever, but I do struggle with books that are they're just you have to read a lot of preamble almost before you get into something. I get that sometimes these adventures they want to provide you with a rich campaign setup and a richness of experience, and so I'm not dinging them necessarily. But for me, I need almost like an executive summary or something that reads like an executive summary to kind of get my fingers around it, and then let me drill down into the nitty gritty and make it my own. If I have to read a bunch of text, walls and walls of text and word salad to get to kind of to mine out the pertinent details. I struggle with that, and it turns me right off. So, so to make that, to keep that positive, yeah, I like things that are that I can that grab me right away, and give me that sort of, here's the skinny, and now let's get into it, and you can run it, and you know, that way too, when your players are throwing things at you, as players always do, right? Good players are always coming up with different ways to approach a situation. You're not sort of fumbling through the text, through sort of swamps of words to find the something that will be helpful, as they try
Right.
something. I like to be able to put my mind and my eye right on what I need to find. So it can even be, this can be it can be a big fat book, but it's if it's organized a certain way, that really helps me out. If it's organized in that way that it's easy to navigate.
What are your thoughts on that, guys?
Well, I'll kind of cascade along with a lot of what Brian said. I mean, there was a time when I liked to read a lot of those old modules. Like reading the original Temple of Elemental Evil was great. There was a lot of story and setup, like Brian said. But you got to kind of get through that to get to the meat of the adventure. These days, what I find more useful would be something more akin to, like, say, Hole in the Oak or the Shimmering Grotto from Necrotic Gnome. The layout and the design and the way the text is written, how clean it is, how accessible it is, how fast it is to read through. Because literally, it's both of those adventures. If I was to run one as a scenario, I could pick that up, review it in 15 minutes, and I could be ready to go. Even down to the idea of how the map, much like the old school days when we used to have those separate covers, the map is a full 2-page spread. All the rooms are color coded, to certain parts of the book. The book is color coded to the map. The map has key information on it in the form of prompts that let you know when these guys walk up to this intersection, if they look right, what are they going to see or hear? They might see a light or hear a certain noise. If they look left, what are they going to see or smell? They might get a certain smell of like a rotting corpse or moldering fungus or something like that. The utility of the product now has to be at such a level that the ease of use is paramount anymore, because I don't want to sort through, like Brian said, a mountain of information to find what I need to run. I hate to say that maybe the way we've been playing over the last years has kind of spoiled me, that we focus on such a limited amount of time when we get together, that we know that we're here to play. And I don't want the overwrittenness of a module or a supplement or something like that to get in the way of my ability to have a role-playing experience with friends at the table. It's probably why I'm a big fan of cards, right? The accessibility. I can make a random encounter deck for the woodlands somewhere around a village with a stack of 10 cards and shuffle them every time I go through them. For me, that's really become very paramount. As far as what grabs me, it really varies. I've always been a grimdark person. Love Glenn Cook, the original Black Company, coming all the way forward to Joe Abercrombie and the First Law series and all of the books that have taken place in between, cosmic horror. So if there are key tones in there like that can jump out at me, I immediately start to gravitate toward it. That's why my second game after D&D was Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And it kind of took over me. I was the person who ran that when the person who was running D&D didn't want to run D&D as the alternate. So, but yeah, that's kind of what really catches me and can hold me, gets my blood going these days.
Cool. Ivan?
It's a funny question for me to answer, because ever since I was a kid, I would look at the things like the modules or what the prepared event. It's like, I don't want to run that. I want to make my own thing. However, there are things like, Brian said, which Brian, who cares? Who can tell? But the idea that you should be able to look at it and get it. I really like the idea of having a relationship map if you have one, because sometimes there can be a lot of people. Very often I think of, instead of scenario, I think of setting. Like, if you're going to give me a setting, like, well, how do I figure out how these people all fit together and how they interact? And some are really good at kind of giving you that summary or giving you stuff really up front. I mean, the easiest thing in the world would be like Dark Age of Man, where it's like, oh, here's this village and this bad guy and this other village, and then that's kind of a relationship between these people. But it's very clearly spelled out, even though it's kind of loosey goosey. At least you get the idea right, right up front. Yeah, I got the context. I love both versions of Mordavia, by Triple Ace Games, where you did a great job with putting all of those, people there, and it's especially having it is almost automatically your scenario, because either this person's like this or they're like that. You choose. So there's kind of, I don't think there's a specifically relationship map as such, but he kind of lets you know. And I can't recall if in that one he'll say, well, this person doesn't like that person, or they might, So there's hints, there's clues. So you don't necessarily have to read the entire thing, because more than likely people aren't going to traipse about the entire land in your 2 to 4 hour session.
Right.
But yeah, it's something that's just clear. You don't have to. I mean, even if there's a Reader's Digest version, and then there's the expanded version, like later on in the text. If you could do something like that, and then there are scenarios or settings or scenarios really that you can kind of mine from, like the one in Blade Runner, where I stole a few of the characters and the setting, or part of the buildings or the areas. They're part of the city anyway. So things that like have something like that you can grab that's very, very clear, and you're not reading through a bunch of pages trying to figure all the details out. So just, I think, good writing, really. Yeah, because in a lot of ways they are. There's a lot of flavor in them. There could be flavor. There should be flavor to make you interested, but it's an information text.
Yes.
So I tend to, if they tick that box, then I don't care if they're a little boring. In terms of like how they write about the thing, the people, or trying to write things very exciting, or the White Wolf, 27 pages of text before you ever get to the rules of the game, or saw the backstory. That's nice, but I'd rather have the information.
I found that when I was younger, we're still young, right? I found when I was
57. I'm young.
We're immature, at least.
You guys are all young. I'm
Oh my God, here we go.
So I didn't have access to a lot of modules, and the people that I played with, somebody might have one or two, and someone else might have one or two, and someone else might have one or two, and I had none, and I wouldn't have any for quite a few years. So I was in the process of make my own world, make my own, at the beginning it was just make your own dungeon, and that was very site-based. Like eventually the characters will reach this point, or their subsequent characters will reach this point, and what is there waiting for them. And that was really fun at first, but there's some preference or bias within me that after a while certain things were pushing me to want to create these environments differently, so that when you arrived would matter. And I can't really say what sparked that, but just the notion that everything was frozen until people arrived didn't, I don't know, it hit me the wrong way. And then I guess later in one of the multiple rereads of the Dungeon Master's Guide, Gary's comment about time and keeping strict records of time sunk in, and that became the core, that the world needed to be in motion. That's where that sense came for me, that the world was in motion. And so that really had an impact on how I thought about what a scenario is, what an adventure is, what a location is. And that eventually pushed me from designing a location with things in it to focusing on the characters and what they were doing, which includes where they are and what type of loot they're carrying or not carrying and that kind of stuff. So it was an evolution over a number of years, just based on the kind of my weird reaction to the no passage of time once I put it on my graph paper, until play starts. But as far as published scenarios, one thing that I like that the design mechanism does is you get a précis of what the theme of it is, so you know going in how to read the text that's coming, and then you get a list of the major characters you're going to encounter with some insight into who they are, so that when you see their name in the text, you can think of this list of tags or hooks about who that character is. And then there's a breakdown of the events and locations, like just listed as a chart, right? You're going to read about this first, you're going to read about this next, you're going to read about this next, you're going to read about this next. So if you do get lost in a moment of play, you can quickly go to the first page of the scenario, look at that list, and then thumb through the information, with a certain amount of accuracy to get to the particular scene or moment or location you're looking for. I find that helpful. Not as helpful as the color coding that Brian was talking about, but still helpful.
So, something that Ben Milton, I think it's Ben Milton, on his Questing Beast video blog talks about. He talks about he calls it the dashboard. I think it's Ben Milton. He calls it the dashboard. He's mostly talking about core rule books, but putting the layout of the information is critical to it being an excellent experience. So he talks about this dashboard. So like everything about weapons might be on a 2-page spread, or the core attributes of a character are on maybe a 2 to 4-page spread. So all that the game master has to do, or the player, if it's a player facing moment, they can go to that section in the core rulebook, and it's all, you're not doing, it's keeping the page flipping to a minimum. Almost the idea of a screen, almost like we have game master screens for different games, and the core information, it's like a dashboard, taking that concept and putting it into the books themselves. And I'm talking core rule books, but I believe there are adventure books now that do the same type of thing, where they have this almost dashboard approach to the layout of the material, so that it's readily accessible.
From our All for One Regime Diabolique campaign, I have in my basement a 3.5 by 2.5 piece of cardboard with all these NPCs' names and how they're connected to each other. Because after a while, we had quite a web of things. So I'd look at it. Oh, that's who that is.
3.5 inches, centimeters.
Oh no, feet. It was, it's this huge relationship map that I made, because after a while you're trying to figure out these people. But yeah, having a dashboard of some kind, even if you make it yourself, is essential, I think.
Well, and that's
for context, that was a campaign run by four game masters over a couple of years that we organized in OneNote. So at a certain point, it really was necessary for somebody to visualize the stuff. Anyway, sorry, Brian.
No, and that's earlier, before we started recording, Brian and I were talking about zines real quickly, and that's quickly what you saw happen in books, of the trade size, in roughly around that scale size of a book, that cut page size, was that a lot of the layout designers were making the choice, and the writers were making the choice, that because the cut size is so small, they were leaning towards very slim, very trim rule sets. And after a while, it became almost like the template, right? If we're doing a class, then the class should take up no more than what essentially is an 8.5 by 11 page folded out. So if I open my trade back book and I open it to the fighter, right and left pages are all that one class, and so on and so forth. And you saw that in a lot of the the Dolanwood sized zines when they came out, and his setting was really starting to grow. If you bought a few of those zines, each of the pages that you would open up to would have a mini map in one quadrant of the left-hand page, and all of the relevant text would be here, right? And it just kind of became this form factor that a lot of people really did start blowing up with. And it is very handy. It is very utilitarian. Like Brian said, it's very much like a dashboard, because if you just need to look at stuff for X, you don't have to flip through 5-6 pages to cover all of X,
Right. All right. So then, in the creation of material, Brian Courtemanche, when you sit down to write a scenario that you intend for other people to read, what have you done in the past, and what has that shown you you'd like to do in the future?
Good question. And this I am going to squirm a little bit because yeah, my thought process is fairly chaotic. A lot of times I'll just a scenario or something that I've been interested in doing. A thought will come into my brain, or I'll have like a little something that's been rattling around in my head. And it might stay there for a long time, meaning like years even, until there's an opportunity to match it or pair it with something else. Um, Case in point, fairly recently, I had an opportunity to do a one room sort of survive the room piece for the X-Crawl Classics game, which is by Goodman Games, the X-Crawl Classics line. They've the Brendan LaSalle is he's the author of he's the creator and author of the X-Crawl Classics game. He's a tremendous guy. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. I've known Brendan for years, and he's super great human being, as well as being a very uh, uh, devoted and talented game designer. Anyway, he asked me, he was putting together for the X-Crawl game. He said, I'm putting together a short compilation. I'm asking people to contribute just a very short kind of survive the room setup, so that people could sit down of an evening and play through one of these, or if they want to stitch a few of them together, they can do that and make it a little series of these adventures. So I have always been fascinated with places like well, I've loved theme parks all my entire life. I love Walt Disney World and Universal Studios and all that, because those are imaginary worlds. Those are crafted realities. They're commercialized, of course. They're run by large businesses and all that. But you go there and you pay your fees and you are invited into this shared world. So it's got some role play. I think there's some role play crossover there. There's some RPG crossover. So to get this back to your original question, Anthony, in this instance, I've always been in love with the Haunted Mansion, which is one of the iconic Walt Disney World rides, attractions, whatever. So, but I didn't, and I've always wanted to express it in a gaming context. I always thought, well, how can I take elements of that type of attraction or ride and bring it into a gaming context? So, one of the earliest things that I ever wrote, not for publication. This was when I was like 15, and it was just for me and my buddies. I did a haunted house scenario, and I know that attraction was pardon the haunting me, as I was creating that. And then, flash forward many decades later, and my friend Brendan, the X-Crawl creator, says, "Can you make me a room?" And I said, I know what I want to do. I want to take the attic from the Haunted Mansion, from Walt Disney's Haunted Mansion, and I want to turn that elements of that into an RPG situation. So it's not exact because I don't want to tread on anything that's officially Disney or anything like that. But I take some of those sort of spooky elements and themes from the Haunted Mansion and put those into um that little room, that little thing that I did. Something else, so along the same lines, and I'll keep it brief. I know I've already rambled a bit. I live here in New England, and I'm not too far from the coast of Massachusetts. And one of the legends, we have many legends around here. One of them is the Gloucester sea serpent. And so for one of the Call of Cthulhu projects I did, again, it was a small piece. It was called Fear's Sharp Little Needles. I actually grabbed it from my pile of books. This is actually Stygian Fox Publishing. They're a licensee for Call of Cthulhu, and they asked a number of us to come up with like just brief encounter type one night little slivers of horror. So I thought, well, I've always been fascinated by and horrified by Jaws, the movie coming up on the 50th anniversary of Jaws. I saw that as a kid in the theater. So I've always been fascinated and terrified of the ocean, mostly because of Jaws. I've heard legends of the Gloucester sea serpent my whole life. And then there was H.P. Lovecraft's story, The Horror at Martin's Beach, where he co-wrote that with his wife, Sonia Green, I think was her last name. Sonia Green. Anyway, so I take things that have kind of rattled around in my brain for a while, and I just try to kind of plaster them together into some sort of a workable scenario or adventure or something like that. So in Fear Sharp Little Needles, there's essentially a sea serpent, a sea monster um, scenario that I was lucky enough to have published along with many other. There's people here that are amazing in this book. So, but I was lucky to be included in that, and so I just kind of take. So it is a chaotic process. I can't say that I start. I don't have like a well-honed formula. I just take things that I've always enjoyed, and I try to kind of thread them into something that I think somebody will like, people will like playing through. So, because that's the bottom line. I mean, I might like something, but it might be a real dull thing for people to game with. But I try to find a way to find something that interests me, or fascinates me, and then work it through the RPG lens into turn it into something that people will have a good time with. So whether it's like a well-loved Disney attraction that has sort of been on my mind ever since I was a little kid and that I still love going to see. So I take stuff from that, or it's a folk tale of Gloucester sea serpent, and I mix it with a favorite movie that scared the heck out of me when I was a kid. Things like that. So not very profound, but that's where I get my ideas. And then what I want to do in the future, I don't know. I'm fairly random. I just sort of these things kind of come and I've been lucky to get published, but there are a lot of great writers out there, and every day there are new people out there. So I don't know. Maybe I've had my 15 minutes, I don't know. But and if I have, that's great. There's lots of people doing amazing things. So I'm happy to have my little things out there, what I've done. And if there's more there, there's more. But I try not to set myself up for like a, a, I don't have like a pacing, I'm gonna by the time that the year ends, I'm gonna have this or I'm gonna have that because I have a whole. I mean,
Sure.
like yeah, I have a job. I have I have to do other things, so it's not my pay the rent money. So I'm doing this out of love for gaming.
Sure. I
So
mean more along the lines of you've committed the thing to paper,
mm,
and then the next time you go to commit the next scenario to paper,
right,
the how has that changed for you, and how do you see that changing
sure.
in the future?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is I very much respect the editorial teams if I had to say what's changed, I think it's my awareness and my appreciation for the number of people that it typically takes to produce an RPG
Right.
product of any kind. And the editorial voice can be a wonderful guiding hand. So when I commit now, I try to be very humble about it, in the sense that I recognize that I'm doing work on spec for somebody else. Typically, I mean, that's what my work has been as a writer, and so I try to honor and work within the time frame that the company wants, that the editor wants. I want to make sure that I'm listening to that editor, and I have made changes to different scenarios and adventures that I've written. Some I've been very appreciative of what has been recommended to me. Other times, there's been one or two times where I feel like uh, I had a better way. I think my way would have been ultimately the better way. But I have to understand that I'm working for an outfit that they've hired somebody else to be the editor, and for good or ill, we're going to go with they're in charge. So I don't know if that tap dances around it, Anthony, but I think
No.
my awareness of working with a group, and that it's very humbling to see how many people get in there to make something successful.
Yeah. Ivan,
Yes, sir.
you prefer to make your own things. And I remember
That's
when we were
true.
playing Blade Runner together, we received kind of that first published scenario.
Right.
What is it that would attract you to buying and then using a scenario?
Man, that's a good one.
Because you don't normally
That's
like to. So what
I
what would
don't
be
I
the
don't
thing
normally
that
like
push
to.
you over the edge into the madness of using a published scenario?
Well, see, it would have to not suck. The premise would have to really grab me, like really just like, wow, that's so cool. Um, I suppose what would attract me the most would if it was written in the way that I would write something for myself. That is, um, here's what's going on. Here are the players that are involved. What's their relationship to each other? What do they want? What do they not want? You know, what kind of connections are they? And I like to have timelines. Like, unless something stops this from occurring, this person is going to do that. And, you know, a few timelines like that. And so it doesn't include, by default, it doesn't include things like, and this will absolutely happen no matter what. Or you must keep this guy alive because he's needed here 5 scenes from now. It would have to have an
Right.
absence of that. So I prefer kind of a starting setup, like a scenario that has that, and then, here's what's most likely to happen. Here's what the timeline's going to look like should nobody intervene. And including things like, well, it takes this long for this, whatever, this much sand to run out of the hourglass and this thing to tip over, or for, how much travel time it takes to get from here to there, stuff like that. But like being pretty loose in terms of not really, it can't be an A to B to C sort of thing. So I think, especially anything that's more, dare I say, sandboxy, Village of Omelet type thing, or something that's like, okay, these are all these people are, these are what they're doing, and then okay, pull the lever, let's start it up, introduce the player characters, and see what happens. So things like that appeal to me a lot more than here's what's going to happen next, and here's what's going to happen next, and that
Right. Assumptions about what the characters will do.
right. So that would be the big attraction thing. So, that's a long-winded way of me saying I would like it to get a scenario, not a A to B to C, sort of like I don't want a tail, or I don't want a linear, you know,
Sure.
linear sequence of events. I would like a starting setup. You know,
Younger Brian, what do you think?
So early 2012, about February-ish or so, I was looking for an opportunity to try and do freelance work. I had never written, and I had done everything that everybody is supposed to do when they first start to contemplate this. They look at what it's like to be a freelance writer. They listen to people who've worked as freelance writers. So you get this idea of what you're going to get involved with. What does it mean to, as BC said, write on spec? Because that was never an experience I had ever had. And so you start looking for those open call websites, and I managed to find Crichton Broadhurst at Raging Swan Games. And this is at the time when Pathfinder in 3.5 still has a lot of strength. And he was looking for people to help write material for what you could call the dressings line, which was the dungeon, wells, churches, taverns. The projects I worked on were the cavern dressings, hill dressings, the tundra, mountains and hills, and sea, and then wells. And we hit a lot of different stuff. I think there's another company that developed something similar called Cinematic Environs. So primarily I was given spec to fill in
Cinematic Environs was Critical Hit.
Critical Hit Publishing, yeah. Given spec to fill in a D100 chart. You had your word count, 4,000 words, and I was hell and high water. I knew that I would come, no matter what I handed in, I was going to be one word shy or right on the mark, because you could always watch those numbers and edit and tweak, however you're writing something. And it was a very interesting experience, never having written in that kind of way before by request. I was always interested in what he did hand me. And so some of what I did in the form of research was, because most of what I worked on was environmental stuff. And so, of course, I watch Discovery Channel, and I watch when I'm doing mountains and hills, I'm watching everything about, the Alps and the Rockies and the Sierras and the Catskills. And you're trying to get that mindset put into you. Same thing with the tundra. I watched everything about the Arctic Circle I could. I found out about this thing called the snow roller, which is a weather event where the loose snow on top, instead of forming a ball, it forms a very long tube. And some of these rollers can reach heights of up to 8 feet, 10 feet tall in extremely high winds with loose snow. So there's a lot of interesting things to learn and find out, even, writing something like that. And then another part of the spec was to do a trap or something in the environment that was a hazard. If it was outdoors, like, in the wells thing, it was like, what kind of traps would you happen to find in a well, or what would make a well dangerous in a less suspecting way? And so I handed in, I think for wells, I handed in like 5 or 6 different ways you could be going down into a well or climbing down into a well, in which it would unsuspectingly become more hazardous to you as you went into the well. And this is kind of a pre-agreed thing that I was only going to be with them for about 2 years, because it was beginning of 2012, roughly around the end of 2013 is when I left. And when I talked with Crichton, I was very upfront, telling him I've never written before as a writer. I haven't written since, creative writing in high school. I will do the absolute best I can working as a sous chef in the restaurant field to hit the deadline. If I feel like I'm going to come short of the deadline, I will let you know at a minimum a week in advance if I believe that there's a chance I will miss a deadline. So that at least that way I can let you know ahead of time there might be some challenges. Because for the most part, I was doing this stuff on Monday, which was when the country clubs were closed. And so I had 1 day a week to pretty much work on it, because by the time you come home from the kitchen, you're usually too tired after 16 hours a day in the country club. And it was a wonderful experience. I learned a lot from Crichton about what it takes to be a freelancer, about how to take honest feedback from an editor and the owner of the company, because I wasn't just working with an editor who was also an employee. I was always speaking directly with Crichton, the guy who was in charge of hiring all the freelancers and doing all the editing and doing the layout. Sometimes, a lot of times he would hire layouters, but we were given tools, templates, a certain amount of space for like the trap or the hazard. We were always provided in advance for, so we knew kind of what we had to work with. The surprising thing was, you would think that a D100 chart is pretty easy to do. Oh, I can just wrap 100 things out, 100 interesting things out that people probably have not seen before. And I quickly learned after hills and when I was getting to mountains that was not the case, that your best ideas would come out. A lot of really great ideas would come out in a rush up front. You may finish half the chart, and then all of a sudden you just hit this sharp decline of, well, I don't want to rehash these other 25 ideas or these other 45 ideas that I have. I've got to find stuff that's new. And so you would do research into, well, what were they doing? What were they doing? What were they doing? I went as far back as to look at the GM tools, or the GM toolkit and the GM toolkit number 2, back when the OGL D20 came out, which were, DMG sized books that were nothing but this type of material, to see what had been done historically and how the process was used to kind of get that into that chart form. Because that quickly became a difficult thing to do too, is you can't have a giant entry and then a bunch of one sentence entries that's nothing more than 5 words, and then a big entry. You kind of had to learn how to space everything out so the chart looked good, it flowed well, it read well, it was easy to look at. And so that was my first writing experience. Very eye-opening into what it was like to work as a freelancer. And I just kind of fell in love with it. I've done writing on my own. I've done my own card designs. I have projects like working on stuff from Mutiny Zero, how to turn the entire zone generation process from Mutiny Zero into a card deck, to where you never have to roll the dice, and you can shuffle a 100-card deck, double-sided, 50 cards, double-sided. So you've got 100 cards, and it's very easy, very compact, and you can quickly generate everything you need for the zone with a flip of a card. All based on prompts like RPG a day or many other things, to keep it simple and keep it straight. So
cool. I've worked on quite a few of list type things, like 101 story seeds and that sort of stuff. And it's very interesting how eventually the pool of imagination dries up, and you're like, I've got 89 ideas, but I've already promised to 101.
Yeah. For me, it was always the last 10, the last 15. And on seed dressings, it was the last 5. It was like 4 days of doing what writers do. You come in, you sit down, and you stare at a page until your forehead starts to bleed, because you're trying to think of a new idea, a different way to say or present something that will catch somebody's eye. And it's often not as easy as people think.
But excellent exercise to
excellent
shift your
exercise.
own perspective. Yeah. All right. But I guess not maybe the last, but the next thing is, this has segued for you, younger Brian, into now you're working on your own game.
Yeah. I mean, most people have, if you've been in the hobby long enough and you've tinkered with games, you've hacked rules, as the saying goes, you've probably got a Heartbreaker somewhere in your closet. A game that, is, and it sounds romantic to say it's your ideal game that you want to play, that you want to see out there in the world. And I've tried that. And for me, they were heartbreakers because they just didn't work. They were Frankenstein mishmash of rules without a lot of thought put into them. But over the years, like since I've met you and Ivan and other people from, I came in at the tail end of the G+ period, but mostly in the RPG brigade, where we saw people like Andrew Wood and Within the Ring of Fire and a bunch of other guys who were really starting to kind of push and question a lot. I was more involved after the Forge had already petered out, so I didn't have any interaction on the boards with them or those guys. And that initial blossoming of the indie field, I kind of missed really participating. And it was also when I was in the restaurants a lot. But there's always been questions, right? We see them over and over again in our hobby. And these are old chestnut debates. System matters. What about a system should matter? What should engage you? What should draw you to it? The game should support narratively what you want to do. Okay, well, that's great to say, but can you point me at a game right now where I don't have to tweak it? An already made game that supposedly does this already or doesn't do it, where I have to tweak it to kind of show that it supports the narrative. Player facing design was one of those things I was always interested, because there is this, ever since the burgeoning days, mid RPG Brigade, when we started to see the development of professional dungeon masters, where it was no longer just a phrase that it's your job to do this, to be the dungeon master. It became someone's profession.
Right.
Player facing mechanics give you an opportunity to take a lot of burden off your shoulder, because that approach has so much that is given to the players to then drive the imagined situations forward. If you put more creation in their hands, you put more responsibility to determine success, failure, or degree of success in their hands. It allows you to kind of be what Powered by the Apocalypse called it, a master of ceremony, where I'm not having to prep for 9 days to prepare for 3 hours worth of adventure. I can just have a front, a prompt, a paragraph, maybe something the size of a tweet that inspires me. It's not as Ivan would say, an A to B to C to D plan where everything must happen to make a story. It's just a way to get the ball rolling. But there were a lot of questions like that. What does a game, or what can a game like that look like? And so I would start scouring the indie field, the bizarre indie field, where the rules were more like an abstract thought experiment. The only way to play this game is to actually be a Greek fisherman and own a Greek fisherman's hat. At that bizarre extreme of design, to where you're not really looking at a game anymore. You're looking at a thought experiment. And then all the way back to very old, very classic, the little brown books, the little brown box from OD&D, and a lot of the original game designs in their first editions. Where did things start from? Who were the first people that really drove narrative mechanics with a dice roll? With the advent of NDS, Powered by the Apocalypse, and then Ironsworn are the three systems that immediately lead to mind that really have a dice mechanic that has a loud voice at the table directing or pointing in the direction of the way things go. And so it also helps to drive things forward. And it's a lot of questions about, can I get a game, not the game, not a D&D killer, as most people are trying to say that the next hot thing, newest Kickstarter on the market wants to be. It's just, can I find a way to make that kind of mechanic? And there's a lot of tools out there that do it. It's just, they are all over the place. I like Powered by the Apocalypse. I like the way the dice system breaks out a spectrum of results. I don't like 38 subsystems for every action, right? If I'm going to intimidate, I don't need another completely different chart for charm, persuade. These are all influence roles. I just need rules for influencing. I don't need multiple rules for fighting. I just need a rule for fighting, or how to move a character through the environment. And so it's finding them, isolating them out of their games, boiling them down to their very basics, and then starting from scratch with those tools. It's extremely difficult to be the guy who creates narrative dice. Like, for example, when it came out in Warhammer 3rd edition, there was such a massive backlash not just from the Games Workshop community and the Warhammer community and the way the game was designed, because it was considered an Ameritrash game in the same way that American board games are considered that, but it got a big backlash from the role-playing community. What the frick are these dice? Are you kidding me? No. This is just a cash grab. This is just that. There were all kinds of excuses not to learn how to play the game. Because when you boil it down, Genesis, or what soon became Genesis, Fantasy Flight Star Wars, the game has 6 symbols in the game on the dice. There are 26 letters in the alphabet. In the time that we've had this conversation, I have no idea how many symbols I have just spat out of my mouth. Yet you understand what I am talking about. It doesn't take that much effort to learn 6 symbols and how they interact with each other. You just have to play a little slower, pay a little more attention, And that also became something that I was interested in, probably because, again, I've been a little spoiled playing Turning a New Leaf, is the idea of slow gaming. I don't need bigger, better, faster, get more done, do this, do that. I don't need the new marketing spiel that's being handed. I want a game that will, on purpose, make me stop for a moment and think about what's going on. I want a game that will make me stop and slow the play down, because I'm more interested in deeply playing, not fastly playing. And so it's looking for that. And that's a challenge. In that respect, you quickly come up against a lot of brick walls. And I think you and I have talked about this before. You encounter, and Ivan, don't take this the wrong way, you encounter the Steven Pressfield effect. Nobody wants to read your BS. Nobody wants to really read your game, because they know if they read it, you're going to ask questions about it. They're going to want to interact with you about it. And reading takes effort. That's the initial hump you have to overcome, is you can put something out of the world, but have no expectation that anybody will read your BS. The next one is that wall of, no matter what you say as a designer, that's the last thing you can say to any player. It is my only chance to talk to you as a player and say, I'm not saying that this is the way the game must be played, because I'm not trying to write Burning Wheel. But here's the suggestion, right? And so you have to come to that realization that no matter what you write, no matter what you say, chances are when your material hits their table, they will not play it the way you yourself would intentionally play it. That they will probably play it a little differently than you. That they will consider what you've written needs fixing. It's broken already, because we haven't played it more than an hour. We haven't played it more than 4 hours. We haven't played it more than 8 hours. We've only played it once, and that was for 10 hours, and we didn't play everything we could play. The biggest hump for me and the biggest hurdle is improvisation. For years and years and years, we have been hammered about improvisational play, and the yes and the no but and the no and the yes but there's really no instruction. There have been books written by people who come from the improvisational field, and they have written them, quote unquote, for role-playing game players. We had one of these on Kickstarter. But even that book was nothing more than the same collection of exercise that you could pull off the shelf if you went to Barnes & Noble. It's all about the name game. We've got 60 seconds. Everybody, we're going to go around in a circle, and we're going to say a name as fast as we can. The next round, it's all male names. The next round, it's all female names. Now we're going to do colors. Okay, the next round, it's only warm colors. Do you know what all the warm colors are? Next round, we're going to do all cold colors. Do you know what all the cold colors are? People don't understand that you've got a lot more ability to improvise than you think. If they tell writers, read what you want to write about. So if you like science fiction, you watch science fiction, you read science fiction, you consume science fiction, you could easily improvise science fiction. You have the material in your head. It's this fear you have to get over, much like role playing, where you, as an adult, you're uncomfortable about playing a role playing game, pretend. You need to get over that fear that you're going to say something that's just going to totally flop. because it doesn't work that way in improvisation. We have support. Everybody around you as a whole is there to help you move the ball along because we're tossing it back and forth. I say something, I give the ball to you. You add to it, you give the ball to Ivan. Ivan adds something to it, he gives the ball to BC, so on and so forth. As long as we don't flat out kill what anybody's trying to add. And we all understand we're doing this within context, which has already been a very common word that's been said very much tonight, you know? But that has been the goal of the project, is to, what can a game look like that says, I'm tired of not seeing this stuff mentioned in a book. If we're going to say you can improvise at the table, let's do more than just talk about yes and. Let's do more than talk about playing the role-playing games for improvisers. Let's talk about what making an offer means. If you're going to make mechanics that supposedly support a narrative, what's the story of the game? What is its theme? What is its tone? What is it trying to tell? Much like Call of Cthulhu, right? And what's the language that supports that kind of play? How can we turn that language of play, the meta communication that we have around a role-playing game, into the actual terms that are both game mechanics that can be said when I bumble a roll, or I have a debacle, or I triumph over this enemy, to where that's just a natural part of the conversation. But it takes reading, it takes patience, it takes familiarity. And so my attitude was, I'm tired of not seeing that stuff said in a book. We've all heard the role-playing game intro. What is a role-playing game? Okay, no. What is this role-playing game about? What should you look for in this particular role-playing game? Right. And if you want to try it this way, that's great. But understand that it's structured in such a way that if you don't do this, it can still play. It's not trapping itself in a particular form of play, like Powered by the Apocalypse. PA really has the ability to move across all those stances that came out of the Forge, whether that's authorial, directorial, the pawn stance, the actor stance, based on those dice rolls. But there are a lot of questions to try and bat your head against the wall about, and make it make sense. In the end, you got to write something, and that's the biggest challenge. It's the biggest writing project I've had. Total now 376 pages, and I consider it overwritten, but overwritten on purpose. Overwriting on purpose gives me the ability to say, that's a great idea, it does fit, but it's not worth the page count. So instead of trying to hit a high page count, and build up material, what I wanted was, I want to build a high page count by overwriting, and then let the game collapse in on itself until the structure is there that really supports what the intention of the game would be.
Right.
That reminds me of when we talk about the page count, Brian, and all that. There's a quote by is it Antoine de Saint-Exupéry? I don't know if I just butchered his. He wrote the book The Little Prince. I probably just butchered his name.
Saint-Exupéry.
Saint-Exupéry. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Saint-Exupéry.
I say Saint-Exupéry, but yes, I'm killing it. But he's got a wonderful quote that says, "Perfection is not achieved by," and again, I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's something up to the idea of perfection is not achieved by asking how much more can I add. It's perfection is achieved by how much can I take away.
And that was the same approach that a lot of us, like at the school in the culinary field, that was a field that I went to, was deconstructivism, where we would take dish in the molecular gastronomy field. When you're dealing with chemistry, a lot of the ways to reinterpret dishes was to deconstruct them, take their basic components and break them down to the most basic ingredients that you could get, and then reinterpret the presentation of those ingredients, right? Because a lot of modern dishes and a lot of old school French culinary dishes are very over-constructed. They're very overbuilt. They're overwrought with technique. They're overwrought with ingredients, where simplicity, sometimes the editing out for flavor, can, like you say, enhances the actual product.
There's a great RPG, at least I like it. I have a soft spot for it. And full disclaimer, the guy who wrote it gave me a thank you in the credits, so I've got my my name's in there. However, tangentially.
Here we go with the kickbacks.
Yeah, I know. Um, there's a game that's called Old Ones, Shoggoths, and Rillier, and it's called it. I'm gonna put this Reader's Digest sort of quick synopsis. It's called OSR, right? Because it's Old Ones, Shoggoths, and Rillier, so it's Lovecraftian, right? It's called OSR because it's harkening back. It uses the old school Renaissance or the old school Revolution, whatever you want to call it, the mechanics. And then it's one sheet rules.
Nice.
So it's OSR, kind of three meanings in one. And it's written by a gentleman named Bill King or William King. And he is the writer. He's done a lot with Warhammer. You mentioned Warhammer. He has
Yeah.
written a lot in the
King.
Warhammer
Yeah.
line, and he's a novelist. He's written quite a few Warhammer, big chonky Warhammer novels. So he knows how to write, but he took it upon himself to assign himself can I take and make a Lovecraftian role-playing game on two sides of one sheet of paper? So it's an experiment. He just did it, and he did it though. He actually sides of one sheet of paper, and you get a full service RPG. Um, I love it. I was going back and forth with him when he was putting it together. I mean, he had it mostly formed, and I just sort of made a few suggestions here and there, and he was very kind to give me a little word of thanks in his final product. But it's fully a Bill King production, and but I love that here's a guy that has the capacity to write, these huge fat books. That's a certain type of writing, right? Where you want a nice, meaty, big, full storied, full bodied novel with characters and situations. But that wasn't the assignment that he gave himself.
Yeah.
He said, no, I want to make something that two sides of one sheet of paper. And what mechanics am I going to use? He says, I love the old school style of play. So I'm going back to that old school mechanics that if you've been gaming for a while, everybody I say everybody, I shouldn't generalize, but most everybody understands what armor class is. Most people understand what a two-hit roll is and how to roll a D20. And so he's like, he says, I love that old school. Everybody understands it. It's sort of a lingua franca. And he did it. He's got but how do you take sort of a complex milieu like Lovecraftian cosmic horror and boil it down to two sides of one sheet of paper? How do you, the monsters, the magic, the
It's
sort of
very
horror and
when you
fear?
when you give yourself that kind of assignment, because like I think it was Anthony and James Bacon and I were having a chat one time through Facebook, and I was talking about working on the cards for the Mutant Year Zero project. And I was scouring through like old Magic cards and other card games that I own. And I have a typeset ruler or a typeface ruler where I can measure the point size of all the typefaces they're using for their headers and the names and the text box. And it was interesting to see over time, like how that paragraph of the card mechanics and rules became more and more streamlined, became more and more concise, became more and more tightly written. You saw more keywords. You had to understand more meta language, more meta communication about what was going on in that little tiny box at the bottom of the card. And at first it was in like 5 to 6 point type. And so for me, I've got the card up here. Now the rules are so tightly written that more often than not, it starts to get to that readable 10 point to 12 point typeface. But when you assign yourself that kind of the streamlining of language, the word choice becomes very important. There's structure and sentence, how you're going from one progression to another. My ideas started from a very experimental approach to a one-off session. Some friends showed up, they wanted to play role-playing game. And two of us had run games. We were both game masters. And so I said, okay, well, we've played Iron Swarm before. You guys know that. We could hop into that pretty easily. And the guy was like, well, I liked playing it, but the problem is all those moves, all those roles that you have to look at for the moves and the charts and everything. It kind of slows stuff down. I was hoping for something a little faster. And so I showed him Dark Age of Man. And I said, okay, well, here's this game, Dark Age of Man. It's very streamlined, very simple to learn. And I was like, well, just pick one. If you pick Ironsworn, what we'll do is we'll just use the die roll. We won't use anything else in the game except 4 stats and the dice roll. No move definitions, no nothing else. We'll make, the damage will be very simple. And that was the one he went with. And so we played that whole night with only using the rules on how to roll the dice, using the 2d10s and d6, 4 stats, the value of which would be the add for the d6, to determine the miss, soft hit, or hit roll. Other than that, we had nothing. But what came out of that experiment were a lot of questions. When we were done, guys were saying, well, how would you handle damage in a game that was using that dice system if it wasn't used in Ironsworn? How would you handle encumbrance? How would you handle create monsters? How would you make magic? How would you, all the same questions that eventually came out of like designing an actual game, because it was such an interesting way in which the dice system itself was self-sorting. And that's what intrigued a lot of the people who said they had seen it. That was the first time they'd ever seen that style of a dice pool where you're rolling 2d10s and a d6, and it's got to be either below both, between both, or above both to make the division. Tie goes to the dice pool. And then you also have the added benefit of matching dice on the 2d10s. That prompts you for an interesting thing to happen. And so there's a lot of stochasticity happening in a single roll. You could be prompted for something interesting to happen while somebody is having, a hit. They're succeeding in whatever action it may be. So you could have a complication, whatever you want to do. And after 4 hours of playing, everybody was really surprised that we never fought about rules. Not because we didn't have any, but that it felt like all of a sudden we didn't need any because we didn't have rules. And that's where that idea of being able to play improvisationally, being able to play with trust, that the players are going to support each other at the table, that you're going to communicate openly at the table, really kind of came from, was just this 4-hour experiment where we have 5 people show up and a guy's like, hey, I have this idea for a scenario I want to run. What kind of game system can we use?
Yeah. And that challenge you have taken on in creating Quantum is kind of interesting to me because it puts you in a position where you have to figure out a way to communicate this without raising the barrier of understanding so high that people say, yeah, that seems interesting, and then put the book down.
And put the book on the shelf.
And they then have to communicate to their group, right? So
to their group.
It's
to not push the curse of knowledge, right? We've been, a lot of us play this way. We play improvisationally. We play honestly with each other. We play in support of each other. We have a lot of open communication with each other at the table, right?
But many groups are not aware that this is what's going on.
Yeah, but a lot of when somebody watches an actual play for Turning of a New Leaf, they have no idea that the length and the amount of conversation that Ivan or BC or you or I have had with each other that has developed that kind of culture of play. And so you do have to boil concepts like, what does it mean to make an offer? What does it mean to negate an offer? What does it mean to play honestly? But they're not complex subjects.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are looking for those things in a game. And I've had friends of mine, like when I first broached the subject to an old gaming friend of mine who doesn't game anymore, he was like, oh, well, you just want to make D&D with a different system. And I was like, have you actually looked at the RPG field lately in the last 35 years since I've been back to Kansas City and seen you? Have you looked at the RPG field in 35 years? And he was like, no. And I said, well, I would dare bet that you could go on this website called drivethroughrpg.com right now and find well over 2,000 core books that are not the same system. They may remix a little, they may have variations a little, but they're not D&D with a different system. They are different games entirely. They're not Rifts, they're not Torg, they're not Paranoia or Harn, right? There's such a diversity in the field nowadays that the tools are out there. It's just a lot of them are used in very specific games. They're used in very specific ways, like Powered by the Apocalypse is very tailored to create a certain kind of experience, a certain kind of style of play. If you try and play against the game, it really doesn't work. It starts to break down. Same thing with like Fiasco. You can't play Fiasco any other way but to play Fiasco the way that game is designed. There's no GM, and there's two very simple rules. You know, I, as the player, will talk about how the situation is set up, and then you, as the other players, would tell me if that goes good or bad for me. Or you, as the other players, will set up the situation, the how, when, where, and why, and then I will take that director stance and say how it's good or bad for my character, right?
Yeah.
You can't play that game any other way.
So riffing off of that, Bri, and I'm looking, we're all of a certain age. The four of us are all of a certain age. And when we came into this hobby, there wasn't the internet. There was no drive-through RPG. So right now we live in a time of an embarrassment of riches in terms of the sheer amount of RPGs that are out there, both in print and digital forms.
And don't forget, we got the Ennies coming up, so don't forget to vote on your favorite Ennie.
Got the Ennies, you got drive-through, you got itch.io. I mean, we live in a time where, as in our hobby, it really is amazing. Does that lead you to this is I guess a question of the group. Do you get a sort of analysis paralysis? Because each game, to your point, Brian, you were just saying, if you play this particular game, it's leading you down to, or leading you through to this sort of game experience. If you pick up this other one, there might be some superficial similarities, but you're going to get a different experience, slightly, different flavor, a different outcome. With so many games now on the market, if you're actively involved and you're curious and you're sort of searching, there's almost a fear. I get this. I don't know. Maybe this is like the therapy couch here. I get it's it's like the fear of missing out. Like if I pick this game,
Yeah.
and I think it hits all the notes, but wait a minute, maybe there's another game. If I just go back to drive-through tomorrow or next week, or I go to Itch, somebody out there has got the game that I'm almost there with this one. It almost hits the note, but if I just look again tomorrow, I'll find that holy grail of a game that does everything I want it to, and nothing more and nothing less. That sort of magical Goldilocks game that is perfect, is a perfect expression of what I want to see and what I want to experiment. And does that get back to everyone's got a fantasy heartbreaker? Do you have to make that yourself, or because I've thought about that, but then I get imposter syndrome. I'm like, what makes what I'm screwing around with I'm just throwing one more log on the fire here, and this thing is now a raging inferno.
Anthony and Ivan talk.
Yeah,
I'll answer that question last.
Okay, yeah,
I would like to hear from
curious.
Ivan.
Yeah,
I just rambled on for like 15 minutes or however long that was.
I wanted to make one thing clear, Brian, younger Brian, is when your game's released, I'm going to house rule the hell out of it.
I'm sure you will.
I'm not even going to read. I'm not going to read the rules. I'm
not even test play.
No.
So do you guys do you get that sort of see that wall or of that kind of tsunami of games out there? Do you rejoice? Do you recoil? Are you kind of paralyzed by, oh my God, which one? I'm like a kid in a candy store. Which, what I've only got so many hours in my life with which to game and discover new systems, or how do you kind of, is it even a thing for you, or you're like, no, I just grab this and off we go?
Ivan.
Well, for me, I mean, I think it's awesome that there's so many games. I really do. Even though I would love to be immortal, you can just ask my friends. I really would. I know I'm not going to have enough time to play them all, and so I don't have a big fear of missing out, but I kind of follow my nose a little bit, and sometimes it's like what my friends are interested in. I'm like, oh, I'll check that out because they're interested in something, because ideally I'd like to be able to play the game. So if I find something like this is great and nobody's going to play it, then well, that's great. But then I'm just sitting around I mean, none of our friends really have a game that they just can't get off the ground. But there's some great games out there. But I don't get overwhelmed by it. I kind of rejoice and this is really cool. I know I'm not going to get to them all, but I'm kind of like pumped about which ones I will get to, and very often a lot of them can kind of weed themselves out pretty fast. Like a lot of premises. Oh, okay, no, I don't care. Not
Yeah.
really floating my boat.
Not
And then
not your
there's
bag. Yeah.
not, and then there's um you can look at some like, oh, okay, well they need to go back to the drawing board for in terms of design.
Well,
Um,
that's something too, and I don't want to just I want Anthony to jump in too, but that's another thing I've found. Like when I go on, I see a lot of games that they still need work, but they're out there,
right.
and that's a whole different thing. But I feel like in some ways, you could look at it glass half empty, glass half full. It's like I'm supporting the work of a person that's passionate about getting their game out there and getting it to the table for people to enjoy. But then sometimes as an old jaded gamer, I'm like, well, wait a minute, they totally missed this area of that needs to be explored in this game, or they're making huge assumptions here, but I don't think people are gonna. You could read this one of any six different ways here. So there's a lot more. I've gone on to drive through RPG and I've gone into the discussions and I'm like, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And I feel like, geez, I'm helping them develop this game and but I'm the customer at this point. So that can, it's like, geez, you know what I mean? It'd be like going to the restaurant and paying the money for the hamburger, and then it comes out, and it's like, well, wait a minute, where's the meat? And you're like, well, wait a minute, you got to put some stuff in here. Oh, do I? Okay. And sometimes they listen, and sometimes you never hear from them. So that's another thing, this sort of plethora of games, and it's just so different from when we were young, and you'd go into the local hobby shop, and you got what was there. You didn't even know what you were missing out on, or you didn't
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
because there was Call of Cthulhu and Traveler and maybe some BattleTech on the shelf and plenty of D&D and maybe Marvel Heroes or DC Heroes, maybe a Star Wars
Sure.
game,
I
and
mean,
that
it
was it.
always it always gets harder when there's more choice. I mean, when I had a very small movie collection, it was really easy to watch and rewatch a movie. And now that I have a huge collection of films, I'll stand there for the length of a feature film trying to figure out which one to watch. It hasn't really helped to have more. It's helped in that when I have the urge for a specific film, like, you know, it's time to watch Casablanca again because this person hasn't seen it or whatever, I can just go get it. I've watched all the films in my library, and I'm quite fortunate to have played almost all of the games in my library, and I have played all the systems in my library. So, I don't have a large collection that sits there to be a collection of games. I've gone through them, but I don't have that sense of missing out anymore, mostly because I've spent some time to figure out what it is that I want. And I'm willing to be surprised. Maybe I don't know that there's this new thing, right? But I'll get a new game, I'll read it, and if it meets my expectations for what I want to do with the amount of time I have to game, and if it starts giving me lots of ideas for what I could do as a player or as a game master, then that one's kind of jumping the queue to get to the table faster. And if I'm left like looking at the setting but having no ideas about what I could contribute as a game master or as a player, then it's far less likely to appear. If it does nothing new mechanically, it's far less likely to get to the table and that sort of thing. So now I'm adding fewer games to my library because they aren't doing anything different. They might be doing the same thing in a different way, and I'm not interested enough in systems to just want to collect that different way. Because, mathematically it's the same, or it's just, well, this game uses D12s or whatever. That doesn't grab me. I don't have much of an interest in that. But if its underpinning philosophy is different, or if it is asking you to stop doing a thing that you used to do as a game master, like, say, decide how severe a critical is, right? But instead gives you mechanical support for severity, gives you degrees of success and degrees of failure, and gives you a clear rubric for your contribution, as an improviser. Well, I kind of like that, I also like it the opposite way around. We always used to roll for this thing in the game, but now you're just going to decide. Well, what does that feel like? And am I going to feel unsatisfied because there was no associated die roll or card pull or chit pull or whatever to go along with it to legitimize it? Or will it feel legitimate on its own? And so that's more of how I'm influenced. So yeah, drive-through RPG has far less a pull on me now than it used to. And even in the old days, it was mostly to fill in gaps in my library that I wasn't able to find, that never got imported to Canada, or came out after I was living over here in Korea, and that kind of stuff. And
I'm kind of the same way. The flood of new material isn't FOMO for me. My time on Kickstarter backing a lot of projects has been over for almost a year. The idea that there's going to be a new setting, a new game, a new whatever is not out there. It will be quite some time before we see another advancement like NDS, like the narrative dice system, that just completely says, we're going to do this a whole different way, and we're going to create a whole system around it. And it just kind of advances on. That's challenging to do, and not a lot of people have the tools to do it, nor are they willing to put in the work to do it. And so most of my stuff from like Drive Through RPG is historical research, like with Janelle Jaquay coming up again and again. I wanted to go back because I never owned or played the Caves of Thracia, and with all the rave reviews and the discussion that was around it, I was like, man, I really need to just kind of see what everybody's talking about. And so when a friend of mine came over the other day, he asked me the same question. I don't have nearly as big of a collection as you do, Anthony, but he was like, how much of your shelves have you played? And I said, well, 90% has been read, 10% hasn't been read. I can tell you that for sure. 10% of the books on my shelf I have not gotten to read yet, not even skim. 90% have been read once. 60% have been played, because there's just not enough time, enough people who are willing to put in the effort to learn a new system, to step out of a comfort zone and say, you know what, Mothership does actually sound like a pretty cool game. Let's try that tonight and have a couple of, four one-shot sessions of us playing through some Mothership, or, something like that.
Yeah. All right. So then to wrap this up, let's take a moment to remember all the positivity in the world and all the negativity out there that we can combat with it, and take a look at RPG a Day. I'd like to launch into the first few days of RPG a Day with the people that I like to play with. I think that would be fun.
Cool. Yeah,
So
that's great.
if you jaunt on over to castingshadowsblog.com or to autocratic.com, you'll be able to find the infographic showing the RPG a Day 2025 prompts, and the unusual twist to this year, because we've done single word prompts before, and we've done random elements before, and we, for many, many, many years, have been drawing on a theme. So the unusual theme in this particular one is that if you choose, you could take these prompts in a sort of linear fashion, one leading directly to the next, not just as like a collocation or as a relationship of a topic, but you can actually see the bones of an adventure in the prompts this time. So it would be possible for people to take the month of RPG a day, the 31 days of RPG a day, and work their way through a scenario, much that, similar to the ideas that we've been talking about here, like what is a scenario to me, and what should or should not be included in it, and how can I organize those ideas and the like. So that's the connective tissue between what has come before and what we're looking at now. So the first week of RPG a day, the prompts begin with day 1, August 1st, sorry, is patron. Then day 2 is prompt. Day 3, tavern. Day 4, message. Day 5, ancient. Day 6, motive. And day 7, journey. So as a participant in RPG a day, you could either look at each one in exclusion, or you could take a step back and look at a whole week, or you could take a further step back and look at the whole month and see how that might, inform or contribute to your inspiration in sharing your response on social media positively. Yeah. But what I thought we could do is just take a look at the first 3, right? Patron, prompt, the first 4, patron, prompt, tavern, and message. The other twist, I guess, to this one is that if you like, or if you have no initial idea for working with the prompt, we have the filters at the bottom. You can use one of the filters, 2 of the filters, 3 of the filters, or none of the filters as suits you. And so there's a D6 chart to roll randomly for the 5 W's, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how, to help put a spin on the prompt for you. We have mood, which is a D10 chart, just giving different emotions in which you could flavor the ideas that you have. And there is a D8 chart for subject to help narrow the focus down to, I'm going to talk about patron from the point of view of who they are as a person, or a lesson that they have, that they can teach to the characters, or genre, right? We can look at like the Three Musketeers as a genre, and what would be a suitable patron for our young musketeers to be as they make their trip. Or we can look at it from the point of view of Mission Impossible, who is behind the organization that is sending the Mission Impossible team under Ethan Hunt out into the world to make things happen. That sort of thing. So let's find out. So patron, Ivan, patron, what first comes to mind, or would you like to use a filter?
Oh, definitely. Patron, first thing that comes to mind is somebody that's financing whatever you're doing. Your guy.
The money man?
The money man. He's financing it, but he's also, but it comes with a string, comes with strings.
Okay, so that's your relationship map, in action, right? You have a need, right, and they can supply the need, but,
there's something attached.
Brian Gregory.
When I think of patrons, I kind of think of how the Patreon is backwards. So a patron isn't someone who just finances continually. They may be someone who provides access to a tool that you desperately need or could make use of immediately. In the real world, you can affect change in people in the hobby by giving them the tools that they need. So Olin Brandon, or Olin, I can't remember his last name. Olin
Brandon.
Brandon
Yeah, well, yeah, it's kind of, I mean,
and Jason
yeah.
are two guys that we both know. David Braxton Jr. All three of these people have their own material that they're working on. Not too long ago, the Affinity company put their entire software package on sale. All three suites, the universal package, you can install it on Windows, you can install it on the iOS, you can install it on your whatever, Apple. It's like $60. So I figured this was a great opportunity. I know these guys are working on material. I know Dave's working on material. I'd seen him doing it, and he does those live streams all the time. So I emailed Affinity, and it's weird. They don't have a way to do a gift. They don't have a way to make a gift purchase for someone. And so I just, well, what if they did? I said, well, I recommended that you should do this. If you want to sell more product, here I am as a customer saying, I know 3 people that I want to buy it for, and I want to give them the keys. So basically, I just went to Jason and Dave and those guys and said, hey, look, I want to do this for you guys. You guys, if you can make the initial purchase, or if you can't make the initial purchase, I'll send you money through PayPal, and you go out there and you buy. It's on sale right now. This is the best time to buy it. It's going to be a while before version 3 comes out, so you're going to get a lot of use out of this version. Go out and get it, and I'll reimburse you for it. When you give somebody the tools and don't expect anything back, that's being a patron.
That's being a patron. Brian?
I guess when I think of patron, I guess I'm going to specific examples and specific games.
Cool.
A lot of my gaming is Cthulhu Mythos gaming.
Yeah.
That's a lot of my background. So when I think of patron, I think of outfits like Delta Green, where they are patrons after a fashion. Delta Green, where you are government operatives chasing down and trying to suppress the incursions of the Cthulhu mythos into our world. So you could either be working for the government, they could be your patron. You could be, they say, going cowboy, where you're kind of rogue, but there's usually some sort of a patron. I'm using air quotes, a patron kind of sponsoring you, whether it's the official government or it's some shadowy sort of subset of the government. Somewhere in there, someone is sponsoring you to take on this mission. Same thing with Call of Cthulhu. In the latest, the Investigators Handbook that came out, which is the latest, the 7th edition. There's the core rule book, the Investigators Handbook. They put essentially patron organizations into the Investigators Handbook to address that sort of age-old question: why would Harriet the librarian or Michael the deli owner or whoever, why would they continually put themselves into these, how do we get this disparate group of people to go stay cohesive and fight these or deal with these mythos eruptions? So there's these groups that are formed to take on or to investigate or to cope with. So that's when I hear patron, I think of particular uses in particular games. A lot of my background is that Cthulhu Mythos stuff. So a patron can be very, very helpful in keeping that cohesion of the players. Why in the heck would I stick around to lose my body, mind, and soul? Having this patron organization is helpful. Same thing with like superhero gaming. Patrons. You have you might be a member of the Justice League, or you might belong to the, some sort of you're being sponsored by the Avengers. You're an Avenger, a hopeful Avenger. So you have a patron. They send you off they might give you some equipment. They might give you some help. But what they're really giving you is purpose. They're giving some definition. I need, I'm giving you, go here, do this, and I will help you in some way if I can. With varying levels of benevolence and sort of self-serving motive. Patrons are not all the same, but that's, to my mind, that's how patrons are sort of used or are useful in RPGs.
Nice. All right. Let's move on to day 2. Prompt. Take it in any direction. Prompt. And would you like to use it with a filter or no? Let's start with Brian Gregory. Prompt.
Spark tables. You know, I'm not the biggest fan of Ben Milton's work, but I can say that he can write a mean spark table. He does have, and Knave does have some very interesting table combinations in it that when you're rolling on them, they can get you going. And the concept of making spark tables for yourself as a tool to get unstuck, right? If you know the genre that you're always playing, if you're playing a lot of fantasy, if you're playing a lot of Call of Cthulhu, if you're playing a lot of spycraft or espionage style games, and kind of like the way cards, by pulling random, rolling a random on a table that is, you know, that matrix of words and columns and rows, like an Excel sheet, can get you out of the rut that you may be in, where you feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again, or just get you to jump the rails off of one set of moving cars and into another set of moving cars to get you thinking in a completely different way. So when I think of prompt, I think of like spark tables.
Cool. Ivan.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I use the filter, so I rolled a D10. I got a 4, so it's enthusiastic.
Yeah, enthusiastic.
Enthusiastic.
And the mood filter.
Yeah, quick. So quick. So I'm gonna go with the idea of prompt to be meaning quick or instantaneous, and optimist, enthusiastic. Yeah,
Enthusiastic.
yeah. So enthusiastically and optimistically doing
No
what
dilly-dallying.
no dilly-dally, doing what the patron wants.
Right.
And promptly.
Right, that's right.
Leaping into the action. And Brian.
Leaping right into the action.
Prompts. Well, I guess part of it is I think when I think of prompts, two things come to mind. One of them is that I think a good GM or DM or keeper or game master can use player expectations as prompts. So if you listen if you're listening to your players at the table and they're coming up with theories or ideas about certain NPCs, or they think this might be the place where all the bad guys are getting together or whatever, even if you hadn't thought of that before as a game master, you can use their suppositions and some of their kind of wondering amongst themselves as wonderful prompts to move your game forward. And it also gives players a wonderful sense of agency, because it's like, I knew it. See, I knew if we went to that old place behind the mill, we'd find them, you know, and they kind of made it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, because an attentive game master is saying, yeah, okay, if they go there, I'm going to make that the prompt. I'm going to make that the thing. So it can really help with player agency. The other part of prompt I like, there was an old pulp writer. I think it was Lester Dent. I don't want to misquote, but I'm thinking of, I want to say it was Lester Dent who created Doc Savage, and I want to say that he had a saying or a maximum was, you know, when things start to get boring, send a man with a gun through the door.
Oh, that's Raymond Chandler, although
Oh,
Dan
Raymond.
certainly
Okay,
wrote
see,
in the same
sorry, I
way.
was
Yeah.
misattributing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, Mr. Chandler and the state of Mr. Chandler. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Send in the hounds.
Right. So, but yeah, what is it? You know, when things tend to wind down and you want them to wind up, send a man through the door with a gun. So I think sometimes you can just do that thing and really you can salvage a night with something like that. And I mean, the players are savvy. If you keep doing that in the same way, people are going to catch on. But I think if you do it in a way that you're attentive to your players, that sort of you can spin off, maybe that man with a gun later becomes an important NPC, or that man with a gun,
Your
whatever.
long lost brother's nephew's former roommate.
Right, or yeah, maybe he was, yeah, or oh, maybe he busted into our room, but maybe he was supposed to bust into the room next door. But well, now we found that out. There's all kinds of ways you can spin that off to make it a whole other branch of your adventure or your mystery. So I guess when I think of prompts, those are the things that come to mind.
Cool. Day 3, tavern. Tavern. With or without one or more filters in action. Tavern. Let's go with Ivan.
Okay. Well, once again, I decided to roll because I found that interesting. So subject, and
Oh.
it's a D8, and I got 8 lesson.
Ooh, cool.
And so I also decided, you want tavern? I'd look up some synonyms. So cabaret, go to the cabaret. It's kind of tavern. And so I'm going there. My patron has sent me there to teach somebody a lesson at the cabaret. I have to teach them a lesson. Perhaps the owner of the cabaret will teach him a lesson. What kind of lesson do I have to teach him? I'm not sure.
You don't have to worry about that today on this part
no.
of the prompt.
Yeah.
Very nice. Brian Courtemanche.
Tavern. Well, I think what was and again, I'm borrowing this. Again, I may be misattributing, but I think it was Chris McDowell in his it's either Into the Odd or Electric Bastion Land, and he's got this thing where what was the space being used for before what it is now? So I'm always thinking, okay, instead of, you meet in a tavern, well, okay, but maybe what was that? To give it some flavor, like maybe the tavern used to be a library. You know?
Okay.
I
That's
mean,
fitting for you,
so it's
DC.
what's that?
So that's fitting for you.
Yeah,
What's with
well,
other
I
books?
mean, yeah. So, maybe it has, there's that might bring in some interesting architectural features or some sort of ambiance to the place. Or maybe it was a subway station, or maybe it was an airplane hangar or whatever. So you can kind of give the place sort of a life of its own. And it gives that, to go way back to what we were talking about earlier about time. Anthony, you were saying time and the idea of a living world. It gives that space like this. There was a time when this was used for something else, and it gives it sort of a texture, a layered texture, so that you do get that sense that this is a big world, and the place that we're meeting, this tavern, was once something else, and there are ghosts of that former use, kind of really giving it that sort of flavorful texture that players can interact with. If it's a library, maybe some of those books are still on the wall, and maybe that kind of plays into the scene that happens in the tavern or the airplane hangar. Maybe one of the old mechanics is gone from fixing carburetors to fixing drinks, and is sort of a colorful character with a long history of that built always being associated with that hangar, but now works in the tavern. But has an aviation history, so it brings in all kinds of interesting kind of things that could be happening in that to give that space some life and some color, rather than just a place where you meet, maybe get in a brawl and hoist a mug.
Awesome. Brian Gregory.
So as you enter the body squirrel, your patron warlord has sent you there to this once former library, now cabaret. But when you open the door, the usual pervasive smell of curried sturgeon is interrupted when you see, sitting at your usual table in the book nook, the town guard.
Excellent.
Awesome. Fun.
Curried sturgeon.
Curried
sturgeon.
Curried sturgeon. Oh, yeah, I'll never forget that. As long as I live. Curried sturgeon.
I do hope people out there on the internet take this approach as often as they can for RPG a day, because this will be a lot of fun if we have.
Those are some great prompts, guys. Thank you for letting me go last on that one.
Yeah.
Cool. The last one being message. Message with or without filters. I'm going to roll. I'm going to roll some Sickerman dice. I don't know if you're familiar with Sickerman dice. These are 2d6, 2 different colors, except they're not numbered 1 to 6 on each die. Together, they produce the same mathematical probability of rolling 2d6, but the green one has like 6 and 8 and 5 on it, and the blue one has like 4 and 3 and 2 on it. So it's different distribution of the numbers, but the same outcome. And I roll a 3. So that's Ivan, you're first, my friend.
Oh, wicked. Well, I decided once again to roll. This time I rolled a d6 for question, and it's I rolled a 2, so it's what?
What?
And of course, day 4 is a message. I don't know. I guess I'd have to ask the town guard. Is that who's there?
Waiting in the book nook.
What do you think you're doing here in the book nook? I am here to teach the owner a lesson.
But perhaps he has a message.
Perhaps, yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
I have a message for it, yeah.
BC.
I'm just going to go with message. Knowledge is dangerous. Yeah. So, yeah, just that, message, whether you're a courier for a message and other people desperately want to intercept it, or you're a courier and you take a peek and you weren't supposed to, and now you know something, about the campaign or your place in it, or yeah, just overheard messages can bring people in. That's a prompt. Overhearing, like maybe what are these guards? What are they talking? What's the message that these guards in the book nook are? What's the message that they're either overtly conveying or inadvertently conveying by being there? So I guess one of the books in the book nook flops open, and either something's written on the page or something flutters out of the book that no one has seen in years. But the last patron of the library left it there. So yeah, message. I would just say message to me is connected with knowledge, with conveying of information, and information is always a valuable. Information wants to be shared, but it's also a valuable commodity to be controlled. And there's a lot of play in there between those two.
Cool. Brian Gregory.
Probably one of the easiest physical props to make is a letter. And you can do all sorts of interesting things with a letter. You have access to, ready-made envelopes and papers of different sorts if you want to go that far. If you really want to go far and invest in, the wax for a letter or a scroll or whatever it might be. But it's much like the map, the treasure map prop. A letter is a chance to, like Brian said, hand information out. If you're the courier for that message and you're that player and you're actually given a wax sealed scroll or a wax sealed envelope, your only way to find out what that is, if the DM is so inclined, is to tell you that, well, you're going to actually have to open it.
Yeah.
To figure out and understand what is inside the message that you're carrying. A very easy prop to make.
And that reminds me, Brian, one of my favorite games is Call of Cthulhu. Not to be a shill for any particular game line or anything, but I do love Call of Cthulhu. Yeah, love me
Never
some
heard
COC. And they really were. I don't know if they pioneered it, but they certainly took it and the ball and ran with it in terms of messaging and props. Prop letters have really become an integral part of that game in particular. So
It's true.
It says the bearer of this message isn't real. My God, it says we're just characters. Didn't you say that, Ryan?
How,
yeah, oh God.
When did this turn into a lit RPG game?
Well,
more meta than meta.
Yeah. My
All right,
battery's
gents.
about to die.
Yes, it's time. But thank you very much for
Oh,
joining
yeah.
me for this exploration of who we are as players of a game, how we got into playing, the routes we travel through the scenarios and the design of those scenarios, and ultimately what positive things we can say about it. So it's a lengthy episode, and if you, dear listener, have survived through to the end, especially if you did it in one sitting, I salute you.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah. Give
Well,
yourself
as
10
always.
extra XP, right?
Until the next time, take care. You have been listening to an episode of the Casting Shadows podcast, an extension of the Casting Shadows blog and its YouTube channel, Runeslinger. If you have comments or questions, the ways to contact me are provided in the show notes. Thank you for listening.